to this existing website that gets deployed every time we merge. Kind of modeled after Kent C. Dodds, who's a little bit bigger in the React community. Let's see. And you can kind of design it here. It's got up to 5,000 subscribers. After that, you have to start looking for alternatives. Vue has server-side rendering, but it is a client-side Vue framework, similar to React or Angular. But because can create single-page apps, you can get things like page transitions with it, where you can see that we're technically not going to the server to render our new route, but the rendering actually happens dynamically via reactive variables on the client side. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask. I'm trying to find my TinyLetter form, and I'm going to move it to its own custom component. I may have to duck out for a brief period of time just to tuck my daughter in for nap. So I've been programming, I think, professionally for right around 5 years. But I've been playing with code since a very young age. So right now, this is just the copy and paste form they give you. It looks like this, so we'll style it up a little bit and make it a little bit prettier. But again, it's just going to be that call to action to ultimately to subscribe to a newsletter. So we've created our custom component, TinyLetter form. It should work as is. We'll pull that in, and again, we're going to style it inside of its own custom component. So we'll do which programming languages? So I've PHP, .NET, C#, Visual Basic, JavaScript, and then just a bunch of different frameworks, SQL. Most web technologies I've touched with, played with at some point or another. I'm going to hop off for a quick second, and I will be right back, but feel free to queue up any questions you have. All right, and I'm back. Yeah, so let's get back to business. And again, if there's anything you want to talk about or if you have questions about, just let me know. Move this a little bit closer so that way it picks me up better. So that way I don't have to talk quite so loudly. So again, we're pulling in the TinyLetter form as a custom component. And we've moved it to that just to kind of make it a little bit cleaner. You can see we're already doing that for the Twitch player here. And we're going to pop it underneath this H1 element. So this is just our list of components that we have access to on this page. And then this will pull it in. So you'll see that we're literally just using it as kind of like a custom self-closing component. Adding it there adds it to the page. Any changes we make to this component, anywhere that we've pulled it in, it'll reflect. That's kind of the benefit of having a custom component. It's reusable and pretty easy. It's kind of like just having your own HTML elements. It's kind of interesting because there are a lot of components that I don't think you realize are components. So if you look at like an input box and you inspect it, and maybe we don't have it turned on, but technically an input component is made up of shadow DOM, and so it itself is kind of like built upon smaller components that are more like basic building blocks of the web. And if you have shadow DOM turned on, you can kind of see what it is made of. Let's see. That's how to enable Chrome, enable shadow DOM. So you can see there's a way to turn it on. Let's see if we can figure that out. So let's go to Chrome Flags, check the Show Shadow DOM box. Let's do 2018. Settings. Then the General tab, enable General. It's probably this one. Sources, elements. So show user agent shadow DOM. So when we do that, you'll see that we're able to then inspect things like this input box. When we inspect it, the input box itself can be expanded, and you can see that it actually has a div inside of it. So your input box is kind of like a custom web component, but it's created natively by that browser, and it has its own encapsulated styles and markup that create it. And so in a lot of ways, what we're doing when we create custom web components is we're almost creating like new native components that we can reuse, similar to how the input element is kind of its own native component implemented by that browser. And it has its own schema, styles, and everything, but they're all encapsulated within it, and they don't escape and kind of affect everything else that's outside of it. So part of what it's like a web component spec that all the major browsers are working toward. And once it's implemented, we'll have access or the ability to kind of create these all natively ourselves. The issue, though, is that not all of them support V2 of Shadow DOM, whereas I think most now have V1 support. You can see how to achieve it with polyfill. You can see all the core pieces, what they are. So there's HTML imports, which I don't think are ultimately going to be completed. Script type of module, shadow DOM, custom elements, and templates. And so we're very close to being able to get all of these either with polyfill or just natively, the ability to, again, create those in the same way that the browser kind of already does. So if you have any questions about that, I know it's a little off topic, but it's just interesting to note that the browser already kind of has, oh, hey, Kapamamo, that the browser kind of has the same idea of web components built into it, and languages like React, Vue, Angular are kind of just trying to expose those APIs so you can create them in the same way that the browser does. And that's kind of how Shadow DOM works. So let's see here. We probably don't need the border around this. But let's go ahead and nuke all this. Let's make the language for this Sass. Well, I was digressing a little bit to talk about Shadow DOM and how that works. But right now I'm just trying to set up like a newsletter subscription piece right here. And then we're also playing with the reactivity of this page. So you'll see what kind of happens as the logo changes. We drop things, and it works on mobile resolutions as well. And we'll fix some of the overflow here, and then we're also working a little bit on different page transitions. Are really just trying to build this site out. And once it gets stable, we'll probably move to some of the projects that are on our list in the Coffee Driven Dev repository project ideas. All right. So we're just giving a name to our component. And we'll start by styling our form component. And so again, because it's scoped, the styles for this won't leak out and affect other forms. They'll only affect forms inside of our custom component. Let's just do okay. So I don't know if we need this to be in its own paragraph element. But I do like the idea of the label being separate from the input. It looks like we have a hidden embed value of 1. Oh, getting a text message. Hey, Dangerer. Right now we're just working on setting up kind of a subscription form using TinyLetter for what is essentially going to be the website for this stream channel. And you can kind of follow along if you want. We have a repository for it, and then merges to it. Automatically deployed to coffeedrivendev.com or cdd.coffee. But if there's anything specific you have questions about or anything that you want to see, just let me know and we'll go over that. We talked a little bit. Oh, looks like Sean Stickle followed me 4 minutes ago. Thanks, wherever you are, silently watching. So we'll probably go over... we went over Shadow DOM a little bit earlier and talking about how that kind of relates to custom web components. What technology? So we're using Vuejs. You can kind of see over here that we're using the new Vue CLI 3.0 and that project structure, and we're slowly building out our different views and our custom components. But for our form specifically, we're using the Tiny form or TinyLetter. Yeah, to just kind of build a little subscription list. let's see here. So again, when we style things inside of a custom component, they're scoped to this component and the styles don't leak out. It's similar to the Shadow DOM implementation. The Shadow DOM implementation that native browsers are using underneath the hood. And again, if you want to read more about web components in the web component spec, there's webcomponents.org, which kind of goes over all of that. And that's what a lot of modern frameworks are trying to emulate, right? The ability to give you custom web components in a way similar to how the browser kind of already does underneath the hood. And so Polymer is a much more pure implementation of this, whereas Angular, React, and Vue have custom web components, but they build a little bit more on that. MVC is in like Model View Controller. So we use that pattern a lot in .NET Core and .NET Framework as a way to have like a model that kind of goes down to help build your view. And then you also have the idea of a controller, which can take models. Let's see. So MVC is really just kind of a pattern, right? And so you can implement it in a lot of different languages. It's the same way that you have this concept of MVVM that a lot of things like MVVM is something that a lot of front-end frameworks like Knockout try to implement. They're really just patterns. So .NET Core and .NET Framework implement the MVC pattern. And so this goes into it a little bit, right, where it says it separates your application kind of into 3 different groups, and it's part of trying to achieve separation of concerns, where you only want certain parts of your app responsible for a single thing. So you've kind of separated your app into models, views, and controllers. And a lot of times when we talk about the front end, that's usually the view piece, but so you have a model for data, and then a lot of times you have a view that shows the representation of that data. And you can kind of see here where, so controller, never heard of web components. Where are you at, man? So if you check out webcomponents.org, it goes more into it. But a lot of times when you're using Vue, React, or Angular, you're creating those custom web components. And again, it's just really reusable, shippable components. So you'll see here that when we created our card component, card.view, it's literally just a card that you can put content into with this slot. And then here are the stylings for it, and they don't leak outside of this specific web component. And then I can reuse this component in different views. So right here I have, let me see if I can find it. I'm able to reuse my card component by saying cdd-card and treat it like it's a normal HTML5 component. It's just I've created my own web component, and it allows it to be reusable, passed around, and used by anyone else that's using Vue if they had access to that component. There's a couple of different ways you can hook into that and create more generic web components that any framework could use. And you've seen recently that Angular and Vue have created little extensions that allow you to export your framework-specific components to those more generic ones. And you can see a list of, I believe webcomponents.org actually has a list of more vanilla generic components that you can pass around. No, thanks for the follow, Dane Gerard. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So again, we're really just styling this up and answering any questions. Yeah, Writer Dev has it right on the nose. Yeah. So I just gotta check my phone to see what my wife needs. Let me know in 5. My youngest daughter is transitioning naps right now, so sometimes she just gets a little cranky, so we're just trying to coordinate parenting strategies. All right. So I don't really like that input styling. It's a little too vanilla. So let's go ahead here, and it's nice to have like a static width on it because you kind of want it to match the content that's going to go in it. But you can see we're already expanding out. My email's not particularly long. So we may want to increase that a little bit. So maybe we'll do an input min width. And we'll say 200 pixels. Let's do that. And then let's go ahead and drop the border on that. It's weird to me that the input button is a subscribe. Normally I'd expect that to be a submit, or a button that has an action of type submit. So let's see here. So we now have a length, we now have that, we now have no border. Let's make the padding a little bit bigger. Padding 5 pixels. What's that look like? That focus is alright, but maybe we'd want a different color since it's on that. And since it's white on blue, we might want to actually change that to be a slightly different background color as well. Make it kind of a... Let's play around with some grays to see what we like. This is a color generator I like to use. It's really good for generating complementary colors. Let's regenerate. That's alright, but it's a bit dark. Let's check out the shades for it. Maybe this. Okay. Yeah, so because most of the time they're scoped to the component that they're in, I don't necessarily have a ton of ordering that goes into place for CSS. The only time that that really matters are for more like the global styles. So you'll see those in my styles folder. I have some stuff that's pulled in where I have my reset, I have global variables, I have some font stylings, and I have like a border box reset. And you can kind of see the ordering in my app component, which is kind of like the main and starting point for the entire application. And they're pulled in this specific order. And that will help. But again, anything else is just more specific, right? So if you have styles that are in a component, they're automatically going to be scoped to that component. So their specificity is going to override anything that's more generic. So in the terms of cascading, they're just much more pointed stylings. But inside of the individual components, if I really care on larger projects, I'll implement something called StyleLint, which will actually generate a bunch of suggestions and automatically format and order a lot of those things for me. And you can just kind of configure it to do that however you'd like. And if you want to see an implementation of this, the Vue Enterprise boilerplate by Chris Fritz has an implementation where he has StyleLint in the config, where it gives you syntax highlighting to say when you're breaking those rules for how you order your styling, and how to automatically apply those on save. So that way you're always following the best practices consistently for how you want your styles set up. All right, I'll be right back. 2 seconds. All right, I'm back. Ryder Dev, did that answer your question? Do you have anything else that you want me to go over in terms of ordering Sass or CSS? So we were looking at our global variables file, and then I was going to add one for input background. I haven't played with Golang. I'm more of a Rust guy, actually. Rust is like functional programming by default. I think it's just a little bit more ergonomic. Oh, thanks for following, eDots. I'm just reading your response to Danger. I'm fine to be interrupted. I really just try to play around for an hour at lunch and then share thoughts and talk to nice people like you. Yeah, I know. So RiderDev, if you're getting sidelined all the time with trying to keep things ordered and consistent, your best friend is going to be a linter. And a lot of them, again, can apply automatic fixes on save, or if you want it to happen less frequently when you build or every time you do a commit. And you can set different error levels and warning levels. So Vue has a couple different ones. So there's like a Vue.js ESLint plugin. And it has like all the best practices for Vue, and anything with a wrench can automatically be fixed. Anything with not will at least give you a warning so you know that you're not following a best practice. And again, there's something called StyleLint, which does the same thing for Sass, and I think PostCSS does something similar for CSS. They're all really nice, so that way you don't have to hand manage and try to follow all those rules consistently. They're just applied for you. And you'll see that as you add more people to a project, things like that become even more and more important. So personal preferences don't creep in, and you end up with 10 personal different preferences, but instead everything is, again, consistently applied. So I big time recommend looking into linters, automatically fixing while you're live programming. And then, yeah, so Danger, if you're constantly hitting roadblocks like that, sometimes it can be nice to have a mentor or someone you can work with to help you get over those hurdles, or to just kind of really get involved with the community for the project you're trying to spin up. And so if you have someone you can kind of lean to, or if you have a good place you can go to ask questions just to get over those tiny humps where it's really just not even necessarily do you get it or not, it's just that initial setup. So there are some projects where they make it a little bit easier to get started. So there's like the Vue CLI, and getting started is really just running a couple of simple commands, assuming that you already have npm installed globally. So you just install npm globally, or you can install it with Yarn, and then you can create your project, and then just you navigate inside that project and you hit npm install, and then you have a working live reload environment already. So Vue has this, and React has create React app. And they're both there to try to get you past like the configuration point that can really weigh you down and make it difficult to get a new project up and running. Package for potential security sets to your server. I'm just reading your question, Gatre. I don't know how to pronounce your name. So by default, GitHub will automatically scan all of your package dependencies and highlight anything that has issues. And then you'll get like a weekly security digest that tells you which ones you need to look at. But for but for anything server side, I'm not entirely certain. You could use something like there's like different server monitoring things. One of them is a lot of people use Datadog, but I'm not sure if it looks for vulnerabilities. And then if you look for Datadog competitors, there's usually some good ones. So if you look at Datadog competitors, the big one is... No, wait. Is that not what you mean? Oh, yeah. So NPM... Yeah, a new version just rolled out, and they've had an increased focus on security. And I think the big reason is because there was a version of NPM that came out. It was a major release that actually had some huge security issues. It was the same one that exposed the new NPM CI command. So that I think they even sent me an email about it. I'm going to scary here, but I'll see if I can find it off screen so that way you're not seeing my whole inbox. But yeah, they did just release a bunch of new stuff because they're doubling down on their focus to security, because they don't want to lose people to Yarn because of it. So let's see here. Yeah. Don't show you my Domino's order email. Let's just go to NPM support. So you can see here that there's now an NPM audit. So if you run NPM audit, it will analyze all those dependencies, and it will search for JavaScript vulnerabilities. I can't really link to this. They might have. Let's see if this is a good article. Yeah, so here's a link to the NPM audit command. But again, if you have all of your stuff checked into GitHub and you've turned in automatic detection for vulnerabilities, you kind of get that for free, and you don't need to consistently check with NPM audit. It might be nice if you're using something like CI, you could have it check weekly, where every week it pulls down, runs NPM audit, and potentially gives you a warning if anything is thrown up. All right. So there we go there. I love answering your questions. This styling is going really slow, though, because of it. If you have been following along with my last few streams, you'll notice that I tend to work on this a little bit outside of streaming as well, so that way we actually can move forward a little bit. But again, we're kind of working on page transitions, setting up a subscribe, a list of video series for archive of anything that I've worked on in the past, and then also categorizing them, so that way you can find things that are useful. And then I'll eventually be mining out quick clips that have very focused content that might be knowledgeable, that I can group here as well. And then also eventually Medium posts. And then I'm planning on doing a monthly newsletter that just goes out. That's like a quick digest of some just very generic, helpful programming things that you might have a hard time finding on your own. Similar to kind of Kent C. Dodd's newsletter, but whereas he focuses more on React. Oh, the cards. Yeah, so I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there's a really nice website called pages.xyz, and it highlights a bunch of really cool and well user experienced things for very specific concepts. So pricing pages, product pages, landing pages, app pages, and then you can kind of save those. And you can kind of check them out and see how they've implemented different things to achieve a really well UX'd experience, and you can kind of steal or borrow from them. So the link for that is here. And so those cards, you can steal them if you want. I think I'm just using like a triple box shadow to achieve that effect where it looks like there's like a stack of cards on top of each other. So that's how that's implemented. And you can see here in my card component, card deck component, where we do that. So it has like this whole like layered box shadow. And then they're just progressively a little bit further off, and that's how we achieve that stacked card effect. And because they're kind of laid on top of each other here, you get like a thicker border. All right, back to this. So I think we did move. We have a input background as a variable up here, just gives us the ability to kind of change that globally. We'll go back to the component we were working on. Close a lot of these. Again, if you have any questions or if there's anything in particular you think I'm doing terrible and you want to give me a shout out and suggest a different way, let me know. So here's the TinyLetter form. So we're able to then use that input variable since we're pulling in, not quite pulling in yet. Let's find somewhere where we are. We're going to pull in our global variables file into this component so that way we can use that variable. We'll fix the formatting here. And so this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier, Rider Dev. So I don't have it configured yet for this particular project, but you'll see that I have ESLint rules in place, and they'll give me little green lines when it's saying I'm doing something incorrectly. And if I select that region, it'll give me a tooltip, and I can fix all auto-fixable problems, and it allows that code to be consistent. And so that's just a very simple rule for how we kind of tab or indent different lines. Hey Nard003, how are you? All right. So we now have a little bit of a darker background color, which means we might want to bold our font, but we'll play with this. So let's make label display block. I'm doing well. It's nice to see people consistently coming back. It's nice to get to know all of you, and it's been nice. So we'll do color. Let's give it a little bit of a separation from that input. It's hugging it a little bit too tight for my liking. So we'll do a margin bottom. Give it a little bit of room to breathe. And we're going to want to probably give our input element that same display block so it forces the thing to the next line. Yeah, no, that's the hard part, right, is keeping track of all the resources and then following back on them. I also read it, but I just feel like I get a constant wave of different educational things I'd like to circle back to and check up on. Managing that can just all be really difficult. All right. So these are no longer centered, so let's do form text align center. Because we're doing display block, so we need to do margin 0 auto to center those items. So we'll do and then again, this is if we want them stacked. Yeah, so I know a couple of people that are really good at using Evernote to manage things like that. I've just never had the same success that they do. I really just try to keep a very short list of things I'd like to read, and then I constantly sort the things that are the most important to the top of that list. And then after a certain amount of time, if I never get to the things on the bottom, I kind of curate or cut them out. Yeah, so I've definitely programmed in Angular. I first got started in it when it was Angular 1. But I've only done a little bit of modern Angular development, and mostly just to build proof of concepts for, what's it called? So I do a little bit of open source work on Cornerstone JS, which is kind of like a medical viewing thing for the web. So I've built some proof of concepts in this using Angular just to kind of show to other potential contributors that it's possible. You get a lot of people asking when you have kind of like a vanilla JS framework or library like this, is it possible to use it with X, being Angular, Vue, React, Riot, Polymer? And the answer is always yes. So the question usually isn't, is it possible? It's how do I? And so sometimes having just a good knowledge of all those different Vue frameworks and being able to build those proof of concepts goes a long way towards showing them how they might get started and increasing the contributor base for that library. But if you want, check it out. But it's probably not a little niche for what most of you work on. Yeah, you can definitely create a web app with Angular. Right, that's a good point. Right, I feel like I'm pretty sure we talked about this before. Yeah, you can definitely create a web app if you only know those technologies. Again, you don't necessarily need jQuery. It's for DOM manipulation. But you could use it. So it depends on what you mean by web app too, right? So there's this whole concept of a progressive web app. And if you want to create a progressive web app, you need to know about service workers. But that's muddying the water a little bit. So this is what a progressive web app is if you want to read up on it, how they define it, what it means, the benefits of creating it, using Lighthouse to audit. We recently just added service workers to a project I'm working on at work, so that way they have offline capabilities and they can cache their files, which is something I'll probably create a little educational piece on later. Let's see here. So I don't think I want this to just be... So interestingly, if I do this, it opens up this. So let's change that. Let's see if we can do this with a button. Button, type submit, value subscribe. Service workers are really intense. I could pull up some code and walk through how we accomplished it, but the secret is to cheat. So there's a little library called Workbox by Google that does it all for you. And if you're already using Webpack, there's a plugin that you can use for Webpack that will automatically generate a bare bones service worker for you. They do have an option to create a more advanced one that you can kind of do finer grain control over. But if you're using Workbox or the Webpack plugin for it, it simplifies it a lot. So that way you don't need to get into the nitty gritty of how do I cache files, what's their lifetime look like, what different ways do I queue off that loading. It's just an all-around better experience than having to get into the weeds. Because you're right, service workers are incredibly complex. I mean, we have a ton of tools. Might as well use them instead of reinventing the wheel. But yeah, so even this, like, a lot of design is just standing on the shoulders of giants that have come before us to build something that's pretty. So I'll eventually create a special button component, but for now I'll kind of just modify the one that's here and eventually pull it out into its own component. So we'll do border none, outline. I'm not sure what you mean by downloading Apache. Do you mean just having like a local server? So if you're using something like Webpack, it has a dev server, and then you wouldn't need Apache. Same for front-end development. I guess if you're doing PHP or some kind of like server-side rendering, it just really depends on what your tech stack is. Yeah, local server. But you can build like a local basic HTTP server using something like Webpack, Express, or there's an HTTP server module. And they're all available on NPM that you can kind of pull into a front-end project. And it's, if anything, you can just kind of use it to mock that back-end and kind of like build them separately and then just have them communicate with each other at a different point in time. Let's see here. So what's a good complementary color for this? So we have primary. I'm not entirely sure what our secondary color is yet. So we'll go back to coolers. We'll lock that one. We'll lock this one because now these are both colors of our app, and then we'll generate new ones. And we'll try to find a complementary color that would make sense for like a call to action. We're probably looking for a good red or a good green. No. So yeah, if you want to play with this, I like it a lot. So you can mess with shades. You can simulate color blindness, and you can adjust like your color palette like entirely by saturation. So I can saturate the entire palette. I can brighten the entire palette. It just makes it really easy to play with. So maybe this green. Let's try that. Color white. Probably want a thicker font weight, and we're going to want to increase the padding on this too. Font weight. Let's do 700, I think is bold. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best green. It pops on that blue, but with the white, it may not be an accessible color. Yeah. So if you have any questions about web development, let me know. So you can have a domain name, and you don't necessarily need a local server set up on a PC. But I still do all of my development locally. It's nice if you don't have an internet connection. It's a faster feedback loop because you don't have to push to that cloud-hosted server. Like you'll see that when I make changes, they happen here in real time, which is really nice. And I do the same thing for .NET development. I like to see those changes happening in real time and have the ability to debug, like step through my code line by line as it's running. And you can't really do that once it's hosted. So the ability to have that tight feedback loop locally is pretty important. Correct, Gatra. So we're good. So I only have a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to wrap up, but I'll be back tomorrow around the same time. I guess not till Monday. So Monday through Friday, you'll find me around lunch. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we'll start doing some team programming where I bring on guest streamers, and we start working on specific projects together. But if you want to submit any project ideas, again, you can do that here. Or if there's specific topics you want me to cover, you can always just ask, or again, you can create them as issues. So not Sunday, but I will be Monday through Friday at noon. And I think there's a little, if you look down at the panel section, you should be able to see my streaming schedule, at least as it stands right now. But again, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'll start doing some co-streaming. We have a Discord chat, but we haven't quite opened it up yet, so I'll probably do that in one of the next couple of streams. It's 1 p.m. now, Eastern Standard. All right. But I'm going to pack up. If you need to reach me outside of normal times, Twitter's probably best. My Twitter info should be below in my About section, or you can send me an email. Right now, the best email for that is this. Always happy to answer questions. Just know that anything you might ask me might turn into a Medium article. So there's that. And thanks for stopping in. Thanks for subscribing. Nice to meet all of you, and have a good rest of your Friday.